The voice of sharing, DurianASEAN.
Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
Hello, this is Grace.
And of course, you are with us at our DurianASEAN, the Durian Heat.
Khairy and Sherry. That's right.
So today we have a very, very special guest.
So he is, of course, the Malaysia's Youth and Sports Minister, and we are very honored to have him in here today in our studio. And,
Which is YB Tuan, Khairy Jamaluddin.
Let's say good morning to him.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming in,
Arlene,
joining
and
us.
Grace, thank you very much for inviting me onto the show.
You're welcome.
So before we start our discussion about today's topic, which is does ASEAN integration has a spot for the younger generation, especially young Southeast Asian, a bit of introduction about yourself and your concern about Southeast Asia.
I'm, as Gowri mentioned just now, the Minister of Youth and Sports for Malaysia, and because this year Malaysia has assumed the chair of ASEAN, I think it is incumbent upon not just the government but for everyone in Malaysia to get behind our role as chair of ASEAN this year, especially in terms of making ASEAN a people-centric region, and for the ASEAN project, I'd like to call it that, the ASEAN dream, to be driven by people, especially young people. ASEAN for too many years has been too dependent on governments, on diplomacy, on summits, and on the trade and investment.
It's all about the higher level.
It's about the high level, but it does make a difference at the working level as well, because when you talk about business, you're creating jobs on the ground. But that sense of belonging, that sense of identity of being part of ASEAN, I think needs to take root amongst the people.
So before that, I'm curious why ASEAN matters so much to the younger generation, because we've been asking a lot of the young people in Malaysia specifically, they either have no clue what is ASEAN or they have very, surface idea how ASEAN would work for them. Yeah,
it's actually quite alarming, not just in Malaysia but all over ASEAN, how little young people actually know about ASEAN. They know ASEAN, they know that we are part of ASEAN, but they don't know much beyond that. I think it's very important that young people understand more about ASEAN, because I was asked recently, sum up ASEAN in one word for the region.
I would say ASEAN? Durian.
Well, that's a great symbolism for ASEAN. Strong and prickly on the outside, but tasty on the inside. The word that I used was survival. For us to survive in an increasingly competitive world, not just in terms of economics but also geopolitics, we need to be together. And ASEAN together is stronger. You're a market and a single production base of more than 600 million people. You punch above your weight when you're together. And I really think that the future survival of this region depends on us being more integrated as ASEAN. This is something that young people do not see immediately.
But it's such a heavy word, survival, for young people who care only probably, their latest relationship and college life.
Then the smartphone.
How would it gel well with them?
They have to find money to pay for that smartphone. They have to find money to, pay for that relationship as well, depending on how high maintenance their boyfriend or girlfriend is. And when you talk about money, you have to talk about jobs. When you talk about jobs, you have to talk about a growing economy. And you cannot have this if you don't integrate fast and if you don't leverage off ASEAN as a single market. And I'm saying that all of our economies within ASEAN have done relatively well up to now, but really going beyond that and creating the jobs of the future and that single marketplace where there's a free flow of goods, services, skilled labor, capital, you need ASEAN to work.
I want to ask about the skilled labor in terms of mobility among the youth, because we know even in Malaysia we have a huge problem with unemployment in the country, and I'm sure it's the same with a lot of other countries as well. So how can they actually use the AEC to overcome that problem, or are there certain sectors that they can look
Yeah,
at?
that's a fantastic question, Gowri, because this is really about what does it really mean? What does the AEC or the ASEAN Economic Community mean to me as a person?
Right.
Yes, in theory, the ASEAN Economic Community will see a free flow of skilled labor, which means if you're a professional, if you're if you're a worker within certain industries, you can theoretically move to another ASEAN country without there being a barrier, without there being onerous permit requirements. These are things that are being resolved at this very moment. It's not just about the commitment at the political level, but you also have to ensure that these sectors really open up for workers from around ASEAN to move around. So if you're a banker in Malaysia, engineer in Malaysia, and you want to move, for instance, to Indonesia or to Singapore, you should be able to do so quite freely. But that is not just the governments agreeing to it, it's also the board of engineers of both countries, for instance, having a reciprocal arrangement so that you can practice wherever within ASEAN. So these are the so-called non-tariff barriers that we need to eliminate if we are to start seeing greater flow, not just of trade and investment, but also of labor.
But here we are talking about youth. So before we talk about ASEAN in economic community and all those big words that might be so heavy on youth, but then when we talk about youth, education is very important. So how do we actually penetrate youth via education? Because after they finish high school and the university, all they think about is how they are going to survive in Malaysia. But right now the question is the youth, they need to be able to think in an ASEAN level, as in like I will get a job, but then how do I get opportunities outside of Malaysia?
Be
Or
more
how do I
competitive.
benefit how do I benefit the country, not only Malaysia but the Southeast Asia?
Yeah, that's why, for instance, Malaysia has started an ASEAN internship program where we find young people who are still at university and place them out in our companies, Malaysian companies, both government-linked companies as well as non-government linked companies who have offices around ASEAN, so that they can get that perspective of working abroad as well. And we have some of the best companies, in terms of the best ASEAN companies from Malaysia. If you talk about an ASEAN bank, I think CIMB is clearly streets ahead of everyone with an ASEAN identity. If you talk about ASEAN airline, Air Asia clearly is ahead in terms of the ASEAN identity. So getting young Malaysians out there through the internship program, just as an example, is a great way of showing how an integrated market can create job opportunities for them. It's not going to be seamless, like I said earlier. It's we're all talking about free flow, but there are still a lot of barriers. But these are steps that are being taken, like the internship program, where we create those opportunities not just here but across ASEAN as well.
Do you think there is a balance between science and arts? Because of course they tend to favor more science graduates, and of course for me, I'm from a performing arts background as well. So I want to know that when it comes to ASEAN integration, how much allocation or do people from the arts or even like sports and all have? How can they leverage?
Well, I think arts is a perfect example of a open and free-flowing sector. I know a lot of Malaysian performance artists who perform in Singapore, in Indonesia, and vice versa. So I mean, this is a perfect sector where there really aren't that many barriers already. So
so you don't think it's a disadvantage?
No, not at all. And I think the arts is an important unifying sector for ASEAN. There are many things that distinguish the ASEAN countries, unique to ASEAN countries, but I think we share a lot in common in terms of our culture and in terms of what we can showcase. So I think culture is definitely something that can be a showcase of how we can move around and perform in each other's countries.
Interesting. But we know one area that I think I'm personally interested is politics. Young people, young Southeast Asian, talking about politics regionally, and with politics, of course, you have issues about human rights, issues about political participation among young people, and of course, freedom of expression and all that. These are very, I would say, issues that differ from country to country in terms of the acceptance of the governments in Southeast Asia. So for you, you set up this ASEAN Youth Assembly. Is this something, one of the areas that you want to expand more in terms of amplifying youth voices to address issues that concern them in their own countries?
Yes, because the idea of having the ASEAN Youth Assembly actually came from our youth parliament. They wanted to have a similar setup like the Malaysian Youth Parliament at the ASEAN level, where young ASEAN leaders would regularly come together in what would be known as the ASEAN Youth Assembly to discuss common issues and also to make young ASEAN voices heard on a institutionalized platform. And I think it's a wonderful idea to try and pursue. I've been trying to first of all convince the Prime Minister and then subsequently try and get the other ASEAN governments to agree to set up a ASEAN Permanent Youth Secretariat, hopefully here in Malaysia, which can run programs and which can be the organizational host for the ASEAN Youth Assembly. It's very important because I think different ASEAN countries have different political systems. You have democracies, you have monarchies, and you have other forms of government as well within ASEAN. And we have to, of course, respect each other's political systems. But at the same time, this is the point that I've been making, is that whatever political system you come from, whether it's a democracy, whether it is a monarchy, or whether it is other forms of governments, you cannot ignore the voice of the people. And you must adhere to some basic standards of good governance, basic standards and commitments towards human rights and civil liberties and the right to development. And I think that these are things that young people should speak about. Yes, this may be a different way of approaching something, because in ASEAN it's traditionally been the ASEAN way, which is not to talk about sensitive issues, which has really just been about consensus, and it's worked so far. And no matter what people say about the ASEAN way, I think it's very, very effective. But I think today that ASEAN way should be combined with the willingness to listen to voices from the ground, young voices, and that's been happening. That's why, in conjunction with the ASEAN Summit, there's the ASEAN People's Forum that takes place, which also ASEAN recognizes, which was supported by ASEAN host governments. So this is an indication to say that, look, we do have different forms of government within ASEAN, but we all understand that power really is in the people's hands.
We will take one short break. When we return, we will discuss more with YB Tuan Khairy Jamaluddin.
The Durian Heat, bringing big ideas and critical opinions in Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Gowri.
Welcome back, this is Grace.
And of course, you are with us again on our Durian Heat, where we discuss critical issue in Southeast Asia. And of course, today we have again our YB Tuan Khairy Jamaluddin, Minister of Youth and Sports from Malaysia. So to continue our discussion today, we discussed a lot about ASEAN, about ASEAN community and all that. But I guess one specific area that I'm curious to know about, which is like your ministry, how much your ministry have done in terms of trying to amplify the awareness of ASEAN towards Malaysian youth.
We're trying to...
Because it seems like a lot of young people in Malaysia still, if you ask on the street, like, I don't know.
So we blame you for that.
No, I mean, it's a collective failure on the parts of all ASEAN governments that, ASEAN people within ASEAN still don't really know much about ASEAN.
They probably know more about Backstreet Boys.
That's really unfortunate. No, we've been supporting the committee of ASEAN Youth Corporation, CAYC, which is based in our International Youth Centre in Cheras under my ministry. since the 1970s. We provide an annual grant for them, and they run programs. Obviously, it's not enough. I mean, there is a committee that gets all the ASEAN youth organizations together, runs programs. Perhaps we need to relook at this. It's not perhaps being funded enough. It's not taking an approach that is inclusive enough. But this year is going to be very important, as I said earlier, because Malaysia chairs ASEAN this year. We're going to have an ASEAN Young Leaders Summit in November. So hopefully in the lead up to that, we'll have a lot of programs where get young people more aware about ASEAN. And there are a lot of other things that we're doing on the sidelines. For instance, recently we did a international conference with ASEAN focus on young social entrepreneurs. We're doing an ASEAN run and an ASEAN village in a couple of months' time. So these are a lot of programs that we've lined up so that we try and get more young people to participate. But I don't know. We really have to think out of the box, because when these things are all, I mean, it's well and good doing all these things, these forums, these summits and all that, but it still doesn't penetrate the consciousness of the public. So
it's the cool effect, I guess.
It's a cool effect.
Yeah.
So that's why one of the things that I've been working on is this joint bid for the soccer World Cup, the FIFA World Cup 2034 ASEAN bid, because I believe that it's through sports and arts that you mentioned earlier, Gowri, that we can really get people excited. When the European community started, they had this Eurovision Song Contest, which basically
I love that.
Exactly.
Even I'm not from Europe.
Exactly, and that was, I mean, as corny as it was, that really excited people about being part of Europe. The countries competing against each other through their bands and the singers. We need something like that. The ASEAN World Cup is just one example that I'm trying to push right now, which will get people together and feel, wow, we're going to host a World Cup, or we're bidding to host a World Cup.
Especially when football is probably the biggest passion among people in Southeast Asia. But yet, none of Southeast Asian countries are able to penetrate the World Cup.
Good, but at least if we host the World Cup, then there's a chance of one of us getting through.
I think we just touched on the very important part, to create something that young people can relate themselves to, and the football could be one of them, music could be one of them, any forms of entertainment, as long as that sort of shake their hearts, to motivate them, they will participate in any kinds of activities regards ASEAN.
Yeah, so not just the World Cup, but there are other ideas and other things that you can do to try and make ASEAN more meaningful to people on the streets. SEA Games, Southeast Asia Games, that we run every 2 years. Singapore's the host this year, 2017 Malaysia. I propose the idea that we rename it from SEA Games to ASEAN Game. Again, branding for ASEAN.
And also the ASEAN identity.
ASEAN identity. And then now you have ASEAN lanes at airports. So, when you arrive somewhere, you just go through an ASEAN lane if you have a passport from ASEAN country. We've been talking about having a single time zone for ASEAN so that, people feel that, okay, we're part of a single time zone. So these small things, well, not so small, but these things which people say are, that's just superficial, they're really important to actually have a impact on ordinary people, because as I said earlier, these trade agreements, stuff like that, just fly over people's heads. But when you have one time zone, we have ASEAN Lane, we have ASEAN World Cup and all that kind of stuff, that means something to people. They understand that immediately.
So tell us more about the ASEAN Post 2015. How can young people, I guess, really participate in it and try to contribute more in terms of how the vision or the future of ASEAN would look like?
Yeah, I think by having like you guys, you have DurianASEAN and you have a lot of ASEAN content on your station. I think this is a great idea, and I think young people should start thinking more within the region, have more collaboration. I'm quite happy at the Ministry of Youth and Sports to support, fund and give grants to projects which are ASEAN centric. I'm a firm believer in ASEAN. I'd like to see more young people travel between ASEAN, have programs between ASEAN countries.
I think that's one of the area that young people in Malaysia especially would love to do, traveling to Southeast Asian countries, probably is because of his ship, and it's beautiful traveling around here.
Sure. And that's why one of the other ideas that we had, which is not just an idea now, which we are actually starting to implement, is the idea of having volunteers go around the world, especially within ASEAN. So we started this thing called MyCorps, MyCorps. It's not pronounced MyCorps. MyCorps is basically like the US Peace Corps, where we send young Malaysians overseas, and there'll be an ASEAN flavor to this, for a minimum of 1 year, to marginalized communities, and they'll be doing all sorts of community-related work, volunteer work in health, education, community organizing, providing basic amenities. So that's something that we'll see Malaysians being sent out to the world, especially to ASEAN, and that I think will build a lot of solidarity.
But if there's like if there's a list of things that Malaysian youth can do, at least in terms of trying to connect themselves to ASEAN or create that ASEAN identity, what can we do? Because nowadays, for example, like how are you able to make friends with people from Laos?
Yeah, well,
they culturally, politically, totally different.
20 years ago, people made friends by being pen pals. They used to write random letters to somebody that they've never met in 3,500 miles away or wherever it is. And now it's much easier. You have social media to do it. And I think what coming back to great point that Gowri made earlier, I think you should really find projects like in the arts and work on it together. And you have a very, very supportive government here in Malaysia that believes in the ASEAN project. And my ministry, I'm a firm believer in ASEAN, and I really like to fund young people doing ASEAN stuff. It's all about getting like-minded people together, a collective of artists, a collective of performers, a collective of young people interested in any number of things, to do something and put on something together.
Oh, interesting. So that goes back to, young people should actually take more control in terms of trying to seek that ASEAN identity rather than the other way around.
You're right, Arlene. I as much as, all the stuff that I've mentioned earlier about the ASEAN World Cup, about the ASEAN Youth Assembly, about MyCorps, these are all programs and activities that we're pushing for, the ASEAN Youth Leader Summit. But ultimately, the ones that will really, really have traction are the ones that are initiated by young people themselves. We, the government, we will initiate our programs, but I think the ones that will have most impact and meaning for young people are ideas that come from young people. For the youth, from the youth, that's our philosophy at the ministry, and we hope to practice that at an ASEAN level as well.
So talking about initiation, something just hit my mind, which is the youth entrepreneurship. So a lot of SMEs and or even startups are booming up in Malaysia and throughout the Southeast Asia. What is your perspectives on the youth entrepreneurship in ASEAN level?
Well, I think there's a great opportunity because we're pushing ASEAN as a single production base. That means it doesn't matter where you are in ASEAN, you can set up your factory wherever, and it'll be easy and seamless for you, at least in theory, to do business within ASEAN. And I think that it's important that young business people get together. There are chambers of commerce for young entrepreneurs in each ASEAN countries. I know there's strong linkages between Malaysia, Indonesia, Malaysia and Singapore. And I think more can be leveraged from that. But it really starts from a perspective that you see ASEAN as a single production base. You don't see yourself as working out of Singapore or out of Malaysia, but you see yourself working out of the region. And if you can get the competitive advantage of the region into your perspective, I think that's when ASEAN works and succeeds.
And it's not about just working in the country like you were saying. It's more about reaching out to that whole 600 million population.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you are marketing a product, for instance, if you have an application, if you're a software engineer and you want to create an app, and you shouldn't just be thinking about creating an app for Malaysia. You should be thinking of creating an app for ASEAN or even the world, that matter. But I think you should immediately start thinking in your mind, if I'm a young entrepreneur, I've got a market of 630 million people, not a market of 30 million people.
But what about marginalized youth. I mean, it's nice on paper and also nice to reach out to privileged youth that are able to move from one country to another country or set up companies or whatever. But what about youth that, for example, orang asli kids or youth that are unable to move forward even in their own country or are still thinking about the bread and butter of their own family? So how can you connect ASEAN to them?
Well, again, by saying that, this is the survival of the greater region, and for them to have better economic opportunities, education opportunities, their own countries have got to have vibrant economies, and those economies can only really flourish within a vibrant region of ASEAN. So, for many people, I mean, Arlene, you're absolutely right. For many people, it's still going to be a concept that is, twice, thrice removed. It's not immediately there in front of them. I don't think that every single person within the ASEAN community will have an appreciation of ASEAN or will understand how it impacts their lives. But to me, as a policymaker, I understand that we need to grow the Malaysian economy. So to put it very simply, to give jobs and opportunities to everyone in Malaysia, including marginalized youths in all communities, we need a strong and growing economy. We can only do that by having a strong and growing ASEAN. That's why ASEAN is important to me, because it makes Malaysia stronger and it gives opportunities for our people.
And I want to talk about our neighboring countries, neighboring to Southeast Asia. How do youth from Southeast Asia can relate themselves to, I guess, the larger context, either geopolitical struggle between ASEAN and bigger countries like China and India and other neighboring countries, and also, like, I guess, in terms of youth. Youth from Southeast Asia, how do they relate to youth from other neighboring countries, either in terms of connectivity or in terms of trying to understand the larger world? Because I guess in this era, I mean, as much as we want to talk about the region of Southeast Asia, at the end of the day, like you say, survival, at the end of the day, we are still very much, I guess, lack of understanding in terms of how do we relate ourselves as young people in this larger, I guess, Asia Pacific region.
Well, again, it's connecting the big picture with young people's ordinary daily lives. Geopolitical rivalry in the Asia Pacific region is not going to impact your ordinary kid in ASEAN. They're not going to see it, and they're not going to be able to understand it in any meaningful way, unless of course they have an interest in it and they read up on it. So it's something that again will be removed from their daily lives, but at the same time, I think we have to appreciate the fact that ASEAN as an institution has opened up dialogue for many years with its dialogue partners from China, Japan, Korea, Australia, India, all the way up to Russia, the United States. So there is an appreciation within ASEAN that we exist within this greater Asia Pacific region. There are economic opportunities around the Asia Pacific region, and there are also geopolitical.
But do you have a similar platform? Do you have a similar platform for young people?
Yes, I was just about to get there. We're just before the East Asia Summit at the end of this year in KL in November. We'll have our Young Leaders Summit, and it's not just the young leaders from ASEAN. We're also inviting the young leaders from the dialogue partners, especially of great interest will be from Northeast Asia, so that young leaders will have an understanding of putting ASEAN within the context of the bigger Asia Pacific region.
With that, yes, thank you very much. This is Arlene.
This is Gowri.
And this is Grace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The voice of sharing. DurianASEAN.